guess an outlaw is someone that doesn't really follow the rules. I'm a little bit of a nomad, I think, a little bit of a gypsy. When I do things, I don't ask other people's opinions, I go on gut feeling. That British bulldog tenacious drive and spirit, that's still with me right here. My dream came true really just by following my gut feeling, but always being passionate about what I did. My story is not a Porsche story. Porsche is part of it, but the real thread that runs through, that weaves the fabric together, is the desire to create stuff. I'm not the where do you want to be in 5 years master plan guy. I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. I'm that lone wolf making my own path. I could probably build 3-4 cars a year and sell them for quite a bit of money, but then it would kind of be a job. Well, you know, the book's dedicated to Karen. She was my soulmate. You know, we were together for 21 years. I would never have achieved anything without her, really. She's a motivating factor to this day, and there's not a day goes by that I don't think about it. Well, life's a journey and experience, right? Yeah. And you've got to make the most of it along the way. And I like the idea of the journey. Hey mate, how you doing?
Magnus, welcome to London.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
This is not Shoreditch though.
I know. Well, you know, I figured we should have some Porsches around us, so the guys at Lexigon said that we could walk around like we own the place.
Shoreditch was too cool to meet up again?
I always say I want to get out of the studio, and I figured maybe you could teach me a little bit about cars, Porsches, Urban Outlaw, everything.
Well, I'm not sure what I can teach you about that, but I can teach you a lot about beard grooming, because I noticed your beard has not come too far since the last time we were together.
No, but I got some biker boots on.
I see that, you're looking cool.
I'm trying to.
Looking real cool. I actually walked past your studio the other day, because I'm still staying down there in Shoreditch, because I like it down there. It's got a real sort of cool vibe, even though it's hipster central. It's still gritty down there. I kind of like that vibe. I think you picked a pretty cool spot here, Lexigon.
Yeah, I think so.
I've been aware of these guys for quite some time, so.
Yeah. So 2 years ago I had you in the studio and we talked about pretty much everything.
Yeah, it was a great time actually.
It was awesome, and then now your book is out and I feel like I already knew about 70% of the story. I mean, hopefully today you can walk us through your whole history, you know?
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
I think it's 40 years almost to the month maybe when you made your first trip down to London, right, from Sheffield.
Yeah, as a 10-year-old, that story is relatively familiar, but I'll go over it again. That was how I fell in love with Porsche. My dad and I took a trip down from Sheffield to the London Earls Court Motor Show in 1977, and that was where I fell in love with that white Martini Turbo that was on display on the stand. And that love affair 40 years later is, you know, it's just getting bigger and stronger. For me, it's like a whole new chapter. I actually turned 50 in 5 weeks, so the book came out and I'm talking about it being a whole new chapter on my life, and it's sort of been a real reflective period for me to look back on my journey from growing up in Sheffield and, you know, now all the way to almost being 50 and living in LA for the past 30 years. So, you know, even though I've got the tattoo made in Sheffield and you never forget where you come from, I'm probably more Americanized in a lot of my ways than I am Anglophile. But it's always great to be back in England. It's such an inspiring place. The culture, the people, the food, the soul, the characters. You know, it's an emotional trip for me actually. It's like a real journey. It's almost a full circle. So it's interesting that you and I are meeting for the second time at a pretty high-end Porsche dealership here in North London. Apparently they've been in business since 1963, which is ironically the same year the Porsche 911 debuted. So there's a lot of history here at Lexigon that's related to Porsche. Obviously I'm a Porsche guy. I know you're a Mustang guy. I know you restored a Mustang as a kid, right, at school?
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering if you could educate some people and like a little bit about this kind of iconic shape that is the Porsche. You know, I think I was watching a video and somebody from Porsche said that if you ask a little kid to draw a sports car,
they draw a Porsche?
A lot of times they draw that kind of an arc, and it hasn't...
Iconic shape.
Yeah, and it hasn't changed much over the years, has it?
The iconic 911 shape, which is what I think of when I think of Porsche, debuted in 1963 as a 1964 year model. Without that 64 911, what's evolved over the past 50 odd years may never have been. So it's such an iconic car. Everyone relates to the 911 shape. In 4 years of continuous production, Porsche's made 1 million examples of the iconic 911. But we talk about the silhouette and the shape, especially in the coupe form.
Okay.
It's not really changed drastically. You know, that DNA is still there. Yeah, the car's got a little bigger, a little wider, but the silhouette is the same. You know, the engine is still in the rear, so that soul and DNA is still very, very similar. You can get in a 64 911 and get in one of these newer ones, and the soul is pretty much the same. A lot of the feel is pretty much the same as well. But Porsche's just evolved on what was a great design. I took some manual window crank and glass for the doors out of a 1965 912, and it dropped right into the door of a 1999 64. Now, 1999 64s were all electric, but the door bolt pattern is identical to the 1965. So Porsche engineered everything great from the beginning, and they just evolved on that. The car just basically got better and better with age. Obviously got bigger and faster and, you know, slightly different in the way it handles and performs. But the soul, the character, and the shape is iconic. You know, it's constantly identifiable as a Porsche 911.
In your movie, Urban Outlaw, you said Porsche passion.
Yeah.
And I know that wasn't even scripted.
No, I mean,
You just said it.
It just, I mean...
What did you mean by that?
Well, to answer your question, the term Porsche passion, I'm just a passionate guy that likes Porsche, and it was just one of those things that flashed into my mind when he said, you know, what does Porsche mean to you? And I rambled on for about 15 minutes, and at the end of it, somehow Porsche passion jumped into my mind like a flash of inspiration, and then it's kind of become a buzzword since then. But I think the common bond that connects all car guys together, doesn't matter what your car of choice is, or your drug of choice, or your religion, as I like to call it, all true car enthusiasts share the same connection of being passionate about the car, the drive, the build. And I think it's a language. I say Porsche's a language, but I think all true car guys speak a similar language, because that's a shared common bond of all things automotive. And passion is something that can take you a long, long way. I'm a passionate guy. I talk about passion being something that you can't manufacture. You know, to me, it's like style and taste. You kind of either have it or you don't. You're either passionate about something or you're not. To me, it's not about Porsches were trendy as a 10-year-old. I've been into Porsches for 40 years. I've owned a lot of them. To me, it's not about this is a cool thing to have. I'm just really passionate about everything that's Porsche related, because to me, it's an iconic, stylistic vehicle, but it's a bit more than that. It's like, you know, I've got a Porsche design watch. This just happens to be a 1972 model, which was the first year Porsche Design started making watches. Porsche Design makes a lot of things. You know, they make bikes, they make boats, they make kettles. You know, it's a passionate brand that goes beyond the automotive world. You know, they just finished a Porsche Design tower in Miami, a condo tower. So, you know, it's just, I like style, and Porsche's a stylish brand, and the 911's like just the epitome of, when it comes to sports cars, it's a stylistic car that has never really changed that much, because he got it right in the beginning. You know, you look at Ferrari and Lamborghini, they're great, good-looking cars, but I couldn't really tell you what the first Ferrari was, because it doesn't really look like whatever the current Ferrari is today. Whereas the 911, we could park a 64 911 there, and the shape's still very, very similar.
Yeah, and it's a brand that inspires loyalty, I think you said one time.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, once a Porsche guy, always a Porsche guy. Interestingly, what I see today, I think there's a lot of speculative newbies coming into the Porsche world that weren't necessarily Porsche collectors to begin with. There's collectors, there's enthusiasts, and there's drivers. Okay. Fortunately enough, the Porsche pie is big enough that we can all have a slice of it. Because some people like, you know, to display their Porsches on a golf course at Pebble Beach, and have people with white gloves and Q-tips curate them and critique them and tell them what's wrong with them. That's not me, but that's part of the Porsche world. The Porsche car is a great equalizer, because in my experience, I've been fortunate enough to travel the world and mingle with some extremely wealthy people that probably would not have given me the time of day if it wasn't for being a Porsche enthusiast. And on top of that, allowed me to drive what I call OPP, other people's Porsches. These are the supercars that I'm, you know, not fortunate enough to be able to afford, but lucky enough to be able to have friends that allow me to drive them. Cars such as the iconic 959, the Carrera GT, the modern 918, the 911Rs. These are all great experiences of memorable moments behind the wheel of other people's Porsches. So that's what's great about the Porsche world and the Porsche community. I find it's it's approachable, you know. I've been places that I thought I'd never get into, you know, as a long-haired, bearded rocker guy, but back to that Porsche passion thing, you know, sometimes it opens doors you never think you'd be able to walk through.
A lot of people wouldn't see the long-haired, bearded rocker guy and Porsche together, but maybe that's just a misconception, because like you said, there's passionate people that like hot rodding Porsches, that like building those Porsches. I mean, were you surprised by Porsche's response to Urban Outlaw and everything else? And what's it been like?
A little bit, because I didn't know what to expect. You know, the film came out within a month or two. I got a Porsche crest from Chalmers Nehemiah, who worked at Porsche, and ironically, he was a buddy of mine who I hadn't seen for many years, and sent me this plaque saying, you know, he'd seen the film and this was something for the garage. And ironically, in the film, I talk about riding to Porsche as a 10-year-old, following up on that London Earls Court Motor Show in 1977. Yeah. That story is pretty familiar, but Porsche did write back to me and say, hey, visit us when you're older, because I'd said, hey, I want to design for you. And back then, 40 years ago, Porsche was a smaller company. They weren't part of this global empire. And they wrote back to me and said, call us when you're older. And it took 35 years for me to actually visit Porsche. And I visited them probably 9 months after Urban Outlaw came out. So to me, this film really changed my life in the sense of, I think doors opened up that I never thought would open up before. You know, for me, this is a hobby. It's not a job. I don't build customer cars. You can't come to me and say, hey, I love 277, but I'd like one slightly different. It's a hobby for me. It's still a hobby. It's an out-of-control hobby, as I call it, but it's not a business. And it's just something, I keep using the word passion, but it's authentic to me. It's relatable to me. It's something that I've never given up on, that dream, and that dream just keeps evolving, and my journey with Porsche keeps evolving. And this is a classic example here, being stood out in North London outside this spectacular facility here at Lexigon Motor Company.
Yeah, and talk to me about this concept of urban outlaw. Well, you talk about this in the book, but what is an outlaw?
Well, I guess if you Google outlaw, the definition is someone that's beyond the boundaries of the law. So outlaw Josie Wales, the cowboy, was an outlaw. I mean, outlaws have been around forever. Pirates are outlaws, right? I mean, I guess an outlaw is someone that doesn't really follow the rules. Johnny Cash was an outlaw. There's outlaw country music, you know. Waylon Jennings was an outlaw. So all these influences, from pirates to Vikings to, I'm a little bit of a nomad, I think, a little bit of a gypsy. You know, as a kid growing up in Sheffield, you know, I was into heavy metal. That was kind of, I guess, a outlaw form of expression, dating back to the 60s and early 70s with Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. And so outlaw, in a sense, is just a term that you can relate to anything, you know. You know, outlaw beard oil, you know, it's just something that's a little bit different. For me, the term urban outlaw, truth be told, I didn't even come up with the name. It was an article in a British Porsche magazine called Total 911 that came out before the film came out. So this was 2011. I was starting to get some recognition for my collection and the builds that I'd been doing. And Total 911 just called the article Urban Outlaw, living in LA, downtown, urban environment, and building these sort of outlaw hot rod Porsches. So it was just something that was already there, Urban Outlaw. We're like, wow, what a great name. Let's call the film Urban Outlaw. So I don't overthink anything, you know, even the way I design the Porsches, you know, I have a sort of pool of influence that I pull from. It's late 60s, early 70s, what I call sport purpose, streetable track cars, the Vic Elford Monte Carlo rally style mixed with a little bit of Le Mans influence. But my influence has always been a lot of Americana, Dukes of Hazzard, Evel Knievel, Captain America, Stars and Stripes, Red, White and Blue. So I throw all that influence into a blender, and what comes out in the Porsche world is just my own interpretation of my own aesthetic style. They've been called outlaw Porsches. I mean, outlaw 356s have been around a long time. So the term outlaw is nothing new. It's just a matter of expressing yourself in a different way, whether you're a Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash country western guy, or whether you're a Viking pirate, or whether you're like me building outlaw Porsches. I mean, there's outlaw hot rod guys everywhere.
It's funny because you got to the States, you reacted to the clothing piece. Then you got your loft in LA, you reacted to that. Then all of a sudden you're the urban outlaw, you reacted to this. But in some way, it almost seems like there's some kind of destiny for you, or something how this is planned, maybe with your gut, because you're making a lot of subconscious decisions that get you here.
For me, my story was, how bad can it be? I'm moving to America. It was sex, drugs, rock and roll. And that's when I became what I call an adaptive swimmer, where you get dropped into an environment where you either sink or swim. It's survival of the fittest. but it taught me a lot of lessons on survival, because I didn't want to go home. Going home was failure. And failure for me wasn't something I wanted. You know, I'd had a little bit of success as a kid running, cross-country running, as a 12, 13, 14-year-old. That all ended when I started drinking as a 15-year-old, and the term sex, drugs, rock and roll took a different priority. But I think that little taste of success, having achieved something, a goal I'd set at an early age, and also a drive of being dedicated to achieve a goal. You know, I used to run 30 miles a week as a 12, 13-year-old, which looking back was kind of a lot. And I was pretty competitive at that. But I was always an individual. I described myself as a lone wolf. I didn't play football. I wasn't a team sport guy. And I'm still a lone wolf, you know. I'm not traveling with buddies. When I go driving, I go drive on my own. When I do things, I don't ask other people's opinions. I go on gut feeling. And I think a lot of that character was built early on, growing up as a kid in Sheffield in the north of England, where we didn't necessarily grow up with a lot, you know, and you kind of had to fight for what you wanted a little bit in a sense. But I think that's a typical British bulldog story, that spirit of, you know, going out and conquering. It's part of the British Empire, I think. And even though I've spent the past, you know, 3/5 of my life in America, and I describe myself as more American than I am English, we already covered that bit, but that British bulldog tenacious drive and spirit, that's still with me right here. That's the beating heart that drives me forward to achieve the next step, to see what's on the next chapter, the next journey. So for me, that's what life's all about, taking advantage of opportunities, but also never being so restricted that you're not able to do different things.
Should we go take a look at some of these classics?
Yeah, let's go
inside?
see what these guys have got inside.
I think they got a little bit of everything, and I know you've owned some Jaguars in the past.
Yep, I've owned
Ferraris,
a Lotus. Yeah, I've owned a Prancing
Lotus
Pony.
as well. There's Lotuses
Yep.
all around here. And what, 50 some odd Porsches at this point?
I've stopped counting. It was over 55 years ago, and now it's evolved into, go ahead.
Okay.
Now it's evolved into the whole range of Porsche, but we'll talk about that in a little bit once we get inside. So you know I'm a Porsche guy, but one time I did own a Ferrari.
You've owned a few cars over the years,
Yeah,
right?
I've owned a few cars. I've owned a few non-Porsches, but at one time it was a 65 GT 350R fastback Mustang with a 351 Cleveland, Richmond 5-speed and a Detroit locker. So that was like the Outlaw Mustang.
Okay.
And of course, everyone's favorite iconic car, 67 E-Type Jag Series 1. That's the car that Enzo Ferrari said was, you know, the world's most beautiful car. Then I also owned a 73 Lotus Europa. I see these guys have got some Lotus Europas.
Yeah.
I owned 269 Super Bs, so that was a Mopar end.
Right. Okay, that's an American classic.
muscle car, like
Yeah.
Dukes of Hazzard.
Right.
So, you know, there's the Charger, the Roadrunner, and the Super B. You know, and it's Mopar or no car, as the saying goes. And then I did own a 79 308 GTB Ferrari, kind of like that car over there.
Okay.
But, you know, I talked about growing up as a kid in Sheffield, being the Porsche guy, but not seeing Porsches, and, you know, coming from sort of a working class-ish background, and my dad not really having any cool cars. But so even though we didn't have cool cars in the family, my uncle did own a Ferrari Dino.
Okay. Wow. So even in Sheffield, people are driving around in Ferraris.
Not many.
Okay.
But, you know, a few.
Okay.
You know, obviously successful people, you know, are around. But my exposure to it was limited. But my uncle did own a Ferrari Dino. So, yeah. Prancing Pony, obviously the Dino, really spectacular car, never actually badged as a Ferrari, but Enzo made it for his son Dino. And when these first came out, the Ferrari purists didn't like them because they were not V12.
Okay, okay.
So it was kind of like, you know, a bit of an underdog that's since become a hero type of car, super stylish, but ironically compared to driving a Porsche of the era, not nearly as fun and nimble. But stunning looks. You can't get away from the fact that a Ferrari Dino does look stunning.
Yeah, it's a nice look, but now that's a Ferrari, and that's a Ferrari.
Right.
And this one behind us is a Ferrari as well.
We're in the Ferrari room here, yeah.
Right, right.
But as I was saying outside, the 911 DNA has not really changed. It's evolved in the past 55 years. I couldn't tell you what the first Ferrari was, and I couldn't tell you really what it looked like. Because for me, Ferraris, there's a lot of different models. Yeah, they're great cars, they're iconic cars, but For me, I've always been the 911 guy. And the Ferrari DNA, I mean, you can't look at that Ferrari and look at the 478 today and say it's the same car. Not that the 911 is really the same car, but the silhouette is very, very similar.
Okay.
So Ferrari, I guess, was always evolving different styles and shapes, whereas the 911 just fine-tuned that iconic classic shape.
Does that say a lot about the culture of the company and what's important to the company? The fact that Porsche kept that 911, like you said, you drop in parts from 911s that are 35 years apart, 25 years apart.
Yeah, interchangeability. That doesn't happen with Ferraris. I mean, you don't really see hot-rodded outlaw Ferraris. I mean, that's kind of a rarity to see someone that's modified a Ferrari. But I think the big difference is, for me, I always say Porsches, you know, you see a lot of high-mileage Porsches because they were driven. It was the affordable, everyman supercar. You don't see a lot of high-mileage Ferraris because they're not necessarily the everyday everyman supercar. You know, they're iconic classics built in smaller volumes, but just the prices of Ferraris are staggering. But I do like Ferraris. Recently I had the privilege of driving. People say to me, you know, what cars have you driven? And I've driven a lot of non-Porsches, you know, some super exotic stuff. You know, perhaps the most exotic thing I've driven is a Pagani Huayra.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was the most exciting car I've driven.
Okay.
I've driven McLarens, but I will say one of the most exciting cars I've recently driven, I'd put it down in one of my top 5 all-time drives, is a Ferrari F40 in Miami on Key Biscayne Bridge. What I love about the F40 is, I used to own a 308 GTB. The F40 in a sense is like a 308 or a 512 on steroids, but everything's still kind of familiar when you get in there. It's got the odd off-center pedals and the steering wheel's crooked a certain way, but it's got that gate change shifter that's intoxicating. But the F40 is such a raw car. It's like a 67 911R. There's nothing in it you don't need. It's Alcantara wrapped dash, carbon fiber doors. You see the seams. There's no radio. There's really nothing there other than what you need. It's basic, it's raw, and it's stripped. But it was one of the most intoxicating drives where I just didn't want to get out of the car. And it was really a magical, memorable moment that was a non-Porsche moment. And it was back to, you know, OPC, other people's cars, being fortunate enough to drive a car that's worth several $1,000,000 in an iconic city like Miami. You know, I talk about growing up as a kid in the 70s, and I describe this story all the time. There were 3 posters you had on the wall, potentially. Porsche Turbo, Ferrari 512 Boxer, or Testarossa, or Lamborghini Countach. So those were iconic cars. In that era, I talk about Miami Vice quite a lot. Slant nose conversions, Ferraris. Miami's an intoxicating city. I live in LA, but I've visited Miami quite a few times in the past year. And it's a great car culture city. It's flamboyant, and it's back to the people, passionate people. You know, Miami, it's a South American gateway, the banking capital of Colombia and Bogota and Brazil and Argentina. And I didn't realize how big the car collection community is in Miami. I think it goes all the way back to the 70s and 80s. You know, it's cocaine, it's Scarface, it's that whole Miami vibe. Those cars are still there. It's the Porsche Turbo capital, I think, of the country. There's more Porsche Turbos there. And ironically, the number 1 and 2 Porsche dealerships in America, Champion Motorsports and the Collection, are both located in Miami. Okay. So Miami is an intoxicating car culture city that was really not on my radar. And I think there's a lot of flavor there with, you know, like I say, it being the gateway to Latin America. And those people are passionate about cars. It's completely different to the West Coast California scene. And that was where I got to drive that F40. Maybe we should stop talking about Ferrari and go look at some Porsche.
Yeah, let's do that. And you know, you're no stranger to racing. And I don't know if a lot of people know that about you, but you had a point in your life where I think you maybe got a little bit obsessed and were racing all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you get addicted. It's the Porsche slippery slope, or the slippery slope of adrenaline. And, you know, I think adrenaline, whether you're an MMA guy, a fighter guy, or you just get the addiction for the need for speed. See, I joined the Porsche Owners Club in 2002, 15 years ago, and that's when I described taking my aggressive street driving to the track. Ultimately, I became a better driver because the track is a safer environment where you don't have to worry about oncoming traffic unless someone's spun in front of you. But I used to drive 277 to the track. You know, it was a streetable track car. It wasn't a full-blown race car that wasn't streetable. Right. So, you know, I drove that car from LA to Laguna Seca and back a dozen times and raced it. And ultimately, that's another great thing about Porsche. The cars, really, you can drive them off the showroom floor. Even today, take them to the track and drive it back home. You know, the current 991 GT3 RS or the Gen 2 GT3, these are cars you could buy here, drive to Silverstone, do a track day and drive it home. So reliable, performance orientated. But yeah, I got bit by the track bug, and I think ultimately it sort of made me a better driver. And for the first time ever, I'm actually going to Le Mans this year. And these guys have got a 962 here, Formula Le Mans car.
I think this is a Le Mans car.
Yeah. You know, Porsche's won Le Mans 18 times. And I'm extending my European tour specifically so I could go to Le Mans. So on this trip, I'm away for 25 days. You know, I'm on the UK book tour, which is essentially only 8 days. Right. And then I decided, well, I'm going to go to Paris. I'm going to do an outlaw gathering in Paris and remake Rendezvous. And then I looked at the calendar and realized Le Mans was only a week later. And I'd never, ever been to Le Mans, obviously seen a lot of it. Obviously, Steve McQueen, Le Mans film, 1970. Right. You know, just an epic, epic film about motorsports and racing. You know, everything else he's waiting in between is his favorite line, the comment, the iconic line.
Racing's important to men who do it well. When you're racing, it's life. Anything that happens before or after, it's just waiting.
So for me, it was about time that turning 50, I'd go to Le Mans for the first time. Like I say, Porsche's won Le Mans 18 times.
And it's an endurance race.
It's a 24-hour race, and you've got to run for 24 hours. That's where Porsche excels. The only other company that's ever come close is Audi.
And when you see this, I mean, does this look like a Porsche to you? And what do you see in this car?
I mean, this is a full-blown race car. Ironically, there's a guy in Japan that's got a streetable 962.
Okay.
On the street.
Okay.
But no, this is race car all the way. I mean, this is the evolution, you know, really of the 917 Longtail, you know, in its format of, I mean, this is 30 years old, this car, if you look at it.
Okay, all right. Doesn't look 30 years old.
87, 88. I mean, that silhouette is not really drastically that much different. The current 919 are the car that's won the past 2 years for Porsche, 2015 and 2016. So hopefully my first trip to Le Mans this year will be Porsche's hat-trick of 3 wins in a row, 15, 16, and 17.
And you're gonna be there for the 24 hours?
I'm going to be there for 24 hours, rain or shine. It looks like it does rain every time at Le Mans. So that's an endurance race, just being there the whole time, watching the 24-hour race. We'll see.
Okay.
I mean, 24 hours is a long time to be. It depends how exciting the race is and how much it rains, I guess.
Should be really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
But no, Porsche has a lot of history at Le Mans. I think that is just great for the brand. I mean, Porsche was built on racing. You know, they had a first-class win at Le Mans in 1952 with a 1948, I believe, 356. So that was Porsche's first class win at Le Mans 55 years ago. Okay. And essentially not more than a streetable race car. Back to the giant killer days. Yeah. But their first overall victory was in 1970. So come a long way and still racing at Le Mans 55 years later.
It seems going in with Porsche culture to win a race like Le Mans, and again, you know, with the Americans just piling horsepower on in kind of the muscle car era, Porsche always seemed to be about that racing car, that one that could corner. And even you talk about it in your book, you know, the fact that this thing can do it all, right? Right.
As much as I love talking about Porsche, though, you know, I also like talking about Ford. And one of my favorite stories is Carroll Shelby, GT40, going to Le Mans. You know, I'm a Porsche guy, but I'm a car guy. And back to that relatability of all true car guys share the same passion, whether you're a Ferrari guy, a Ford guy, or a Porsche guy. I mean, right there, a iconic Cobra. I mean, really a pretty awesome car right there.
Yeah.
And that was, in a sense, a hot rod. You know, Carroll Shelby took that little AC Cobra. That story's really familiar, but, you know, basically got a couple of AC cars from England. Yeah. Took them back to America in Venice and basically shoehorned that 289 motor in it in its narrow body configuration.
That's where he did it, in Venice, California.
Venice, California.
Where you started off.
Well, here's the really crazy thing. About a month ago, when I first met you 2 years ago, I was here to do this Need for Speed video game, which in the game world is set in LA, but quite a lot of it was shot in Shoreditch, ironically. Some of my scenes were shot in Shoreditch for the nightclub portion. So that was how you and I met, through a video game, or me coming to England to shoot a video game called Need for Speed. About a month ago, I did some voiceover for another video game called Forza Motorsports. And there's 3 big video games: Gran Turismo, which is Sony, Forza Motorsports, and then Need for Speed. So the interesting thing about Forza Motorsports is I went and did some voiceover about a month ago, and they're headquartered in Venice, in Carroll Shelby's old original factory, where he built the Cobras.
Wow.
So you talk about iconic cars, the Shelby Cobra, 0 to 100 to 0, set the world record back then in '65. I don't know if the time was 10 seconds, but it was somewhere around there where the car could accelerate to 100 and then brake to 0.
Wow.
And that set the record back then, and this is still, I think, one of the top 5 iconic cars in the world. Obviously the 911, E-Type Jag, Shelby Cobra, these are icons of style, performance, and that period when things were just a little bit different. You know, you look at the Cobra and how fast it went and how minimal regard there is for safety compared to today's standards of, you know, safety first. So different era. This is, for me, the glory era. As I talk about, my sort of interpretation of inspiration is mid-60s to mid-70s. You know, it's the glory years of what I call the Vic Elford Monte Carlo Rally, Porsche winning Le Mans in 1970, the Cobra coming out in '63, the Mustang coming out in '63. I think those were the glory years of the automotive world. So that's sort of my DNA where it's set right
Is
there.
this a reflection of who we were as a society a little bit? Like when you put a marker like a 67 or a 68, like you said, you know, pushing the limits when it comes to technology, no regard for safety. Did it kind of tell you what the 60s were like?
For sure, because, you know, we went to the moon, right? In, what was it, 68?
Yeah, 69.
69?
Yeah.
First man on the moon?
Right.
You know, I want one of those Omega Speedmasters, pre-man on the moon watch.
Right.
So yeah, that was a real adventurous era right there.
Yeah.
Everything was happening in the 60s. Music, fashion, change, speed, space travel, right?
Yeah. Change, a lot of change.
A lot of
music, you know, everything.
I mean, I was born in '67. You know, I turned 50 in 5 weeks. So for me, time moves really quick, but I'll hear a song on the radio, and I go, wow, that's 35 years ago, that song. Or talk about going to my first concert when I was 14 in 1981. You know, I mean, it's strange to think back how much has changed in my life in that period. Yeah. You know, I'm on this book tour, and yesterday, you know, I'm doing a book signing at Waterstones in Leadenhall. The day before, I'm at the Ace Cafe. But the common bond thread with everyone that was there was from kids to 70, 80-year-old people all sort of have this passion for the car. And it's not just a vehicle that goes from A to B. You know, it says something about who you are and the journey, and, you know, it's an emotional connection to a vehicle that was essentially designed to go from A to B. But obviously, there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, you said that driving is your religion, it's your drug.
Yeah, it's meditation.
It is, because you don't have radios in your car.
No. But I will say, driving around London is, for me, very frustrating. It's tedious, it's slow moving. You know, I've driven up 4 a.m. in the morning. I made this Urban Outlaw video in the rain. Sunday, I was on 3 hours of sleep, and I got invited out by the Porsche Club of London for a little drive around the London tourist highlights at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. There were 15 cars, and it was great, but there's no spirited driving in London. Okay. Speed cameras everywhere, one-way streets, super narrow roads, 20-mile-an-hour speed zones. So, iconic city, but not great driving city, in my experience.
And you love a drive where you can go out of your warehouse in LA, be up in the mountains within 30 or 40 minutes, no radio, you can feel the car.
Yeah,
it's
sensory
a workout.
Overload. It's a challenge. No two drives are ever the same. My perfect road is called Angeles Crest Highway. It's Highway 2. It starts 18 miles from downtown, basically in Lackenlage, Flintridge, and it goes all the way up and drops down to Wrightwood. The spectacular thing about this road is it climbs to over 8,000 feet. Oh. So I have a photo dated May 15th of 2015, where it had rained the day before. I took out my 78 SC. I left downtown, it was probably 70 degrees. By the time I got up to 7,000 feet, I was in snow. And this was within 65 miles of downtown LA in less than an hour. So I'd gone from sea level to almost 7,000 feet in snow in May in LA. Wow. So what I love about LA is the diversity and accessibility to world-class driving roads. London's great, but yet you're not going to be at 8,000 feet in snow within an hour of here, because it might take you an hour just to go 10 miles across London. Yeah. But the great thing about Southern California for me is the accessibility to whatever you want to do. To me, moving to LA, it was the land of opportunity. It was the freedom that I talk about to do whatever you want to do. Yeah. And by that, I mean you can be an actor, a movie star, a rock star, you can design cars, you can, you know, go design airplanes, aerospace stuff. And it's the accessibility of getting whatever you need produced there. So if you're manufacturing something or building cars like I am, there's a lot of send out, powder coating, CAD plating, chrome plating, and everyone's there to do it. And they've been doing that since the 40s, you know, the familiar story after World War II, guys coming back, setting up hot rod shops. So the whole sort of outlawing automotive thing really dates back to the late 40s, early 50s in Southern California. You got Moon Eyes and all these guys, Ed Roth, you know, all these guys doing pinstripe and building hot rod cars, dating back to the 40s and 50s. And those fabrication shops, a lot of them are still there. And then to this day, you've got all the modern car companies that have design studios out there. Because it's an environment that's creative, I guess.
Yeah, so America's a huge part of your story.
Yeah, because I don't think I would have been able to have the freedom to experiment and the success level that I achieved there and the diversity of what I did, from the clothing design to getting into property that we developed that got us into the film location business, that ultimately enabled me to have more Porsches than I really ever needed and pursue this hobby. I don't think that would have happened in England. Yeah. Certainly wouldn't have happened in Sheffield. But I didn't plan that, you know, it wasn't scripted. You know, my life's this journey that I'm still on, it's evolving every day. And, you know, I'm about to enter the next chapter of it right now in the sense. So for me, it's just an adventure that keeps going, and I'm looking forward to what comes next.
I'm not sure what's next, but I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, well, time will tell, as I always say. I mean, there's a lot of travel coming up. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of diversity. And as long as I'm having fun and trying to make the most out of these things that come my way and ultimately do what makes me happy, you know, that's a life well lived, I think.
Okay, now...
So, 73 Carrera right here.
Yeah, now this
RS
is a room full of Porsches, but...
Yeah, the Porsche room.
The 73 this is something you're so familiar with, right?
Yeah, this is truly an iconic car, the 73 RS Carrera. Porsche made 1,580 of these cars. And believe it or not, this is almost like $1 million car today.
Really?
Yeah.
$1 million car.
In the States, yeah. I mean, the market's dropped a little bit, but you know, at one time, not so long ago, it was $1 million car.
Because there was only a certain number made?
Well, the 73 RS Carrera thing for me, as great a car as it is, truth be told, I always found them overvalued. You know, 15 years ago, it was a 40, 50 grand car. And then they became a 200 grand car. And I never put monetary value on any of my cars. But the problem here is, because it became such a valuable car, people don't necessarily drive them. And a lot of people replicated them just like I did. But it is a really, really desirable car. It's the first RS Porsche made in the 911 range. I've been fortunate enough to drive one of every RS Porsche's ever made. The 73 RS, the 74 RS, the 964, the 993, the 996. So RS Rennsport, or like I like to say, really special. So yes, really, really special, iconic, highly desirable, fun to drive car. This ironically is a left-hand drive version. Porsche did make a few right-hand drive versions. I believe Hexagon Classics actually gave a right-hand drive example to John Watson, the Formula 1 race car driver from the 70s, back in 1973. He still has the car and he's still driving it today. So, you know, there's a rumor that 80% of all Porsches are still on the road, and John Watson's right-hand drive 73 RS is a perfect example of it. This one looks stunning in light ivory.
Now, and this is a classic restoration. So if we walk around this car, I mean, if Magnus got his hands on this, what would you start doing to this thing?
Well, truth be told, I'm known for outlawing and modifying Porsches. But what a lot of people don't know is probably almost 50% of my collection is unmodified. So people always say, what cars do you modify? Well, the car determines if it's getting modified or not for me. You know, 277 started out as a 71 911T that I sort of made appear to look like a 73 RS Carrera. I love telling the story about how I have driven original RSs. I drove one in Germany, and I jokingly said to the owner, when he said to me, what does it drive like? I said, it just drives like all the replicas I've driven. But there is something special about a 73 RS, and that's obviously why we're here, stood talking about it.
Can we grab a seat in there, and can you tell me
let me put you in the passenger seat, I'll sit in the driver's seat.
You know, and it's interesting because my dad had a '69 Volkswagen, and actually that click sounds a little bit like the Volkswagen.
Same
click.
family.
Yeah.
I jokingly say all the time, all the Porsches look the same. Yeah, it'd be great if we could go take this out. Remember earlier on though, I was talking about the Momo steering wheel and how I was fortunate enough to be one of the very few people or non-professional drivers that ever had his own Momo signature wheel. So what I did is I combined the Pro Tipo, which is this, but you notice it's kind of got a thin grip, with the Jackie Stewart wheel, which had a thicker grip. And then I had Momo distress the leather, kind of like my leather jacket, so it didn't look like a brand new wheel. Obviously this is a vintage wheel. But the great thing about the DNA of the Porsche is this really looks no different to a 64 911 inside.
Okay.
You know, they just evolve. But it is really an iconic classic Porsche that a lot of people do lust after.
What are some of the things that feel like home to you in here? Is it like the dash is always there? You obviously knew right where the shifter is.
It's a familiarity of everything's where, you know, where you remember it being in the other car, and nothing's really that much different, even though this car might be worth 10 times a non-RS. Everything's familiar, it's in the right place. The seating position is ergonomically correct. It's easy to heel and toe on the pedals. The shifter's right where you want it. The visibility is perfect. I mean, you get in a Ferrari of this era, you kind of sat like this. You don't see out the back quite as much. This is a very user-friendly everyday supercar. You know, back in the day, you know, this was the cream of the crop back in 1973, 44 years ago.
And it's functional and minimal enough to where you take this out for a strong street
spirited run.
Spirited run.
You know, 210 horsepower out of this 2.7 motor was a lot of power back then. Yeah. The car probably weighs 2,300 pounds. You know, it doesn't weigh much.
And I know some people, I think in the book you alluded that maybe make a mistake of trying to put in a huge engine into this car, but for you, it's not necessary, right? It's not what the experience is all about, just jacking up the horsepower, right?
Yeah, a little bit for me is less is more. You know, it's more fun sort of, you know, trying to chase down higher horsepower cars. You know, it's like that underdog British Bulldog spirit again, but Porsche got a lot done with, you know, a minimal amount of horsepower. I mean, 210 horsepower by today's standards is not a lot, but this car is able to put that power down on the ground where you utilize it. You know, sometimes big horsepower, you can't utilize that all the time. You run out of road pretty quickly, or, you know, you're just spinning rubber. So this is kind of the perfect combination of weight and horsepower, I believe, in a dynamic, great handling chassis that's nimble, stops good, and handles great. So in essence, it's a lot of fun to drive. Sounds great, looks good, and more memorable moments on the road. What'll be interesting is to see where Porsche is in 20 years. Are they still making internal combustion motors? Or is everything going hybrid? You know, it's the next 20 years are going to be really interesting. You know, in the past 100 years, nothing's really changed drastically in that sense of still an internal gasoline combustion motor. The next 20 years, though, we may see that stuff disappearing.
I was having a conversation with the owner, Paul, and he said something to the effect that, you know, the economics have changed, and, you know, with the ownership with Volkswagen, and he said all of the great Porsches have been made. I don't know if you share that viewpoint, but do you think that might be true? Do you think that maybe it's going in a different direction?
It's going in a different direction, but I think classics will always be there. I think the 918 is a future classic because that's a benchmark for hybrid technology moving forward for the next 20 years. So I think these old school classics, and we're obviously sat in one, I think it'll be great if we're around in 50 years to look back and see what the 918 is of today, you know, how that stands the test of time, because that's a game-changing car for Porsche. So I think there's future classics out there, and I think it's pretty exciting to see how they're going to be. I think Porsche will still build fast cars, but there'll be different type of fast cars. There'll be cars that probably don't run on gasoline that you plug in. But if you got a need for speed, you know, you're still going to be able to go fast, right? Whether it's quite as intoxicating and connected as driving this older car, well, time will tell. But that's something to look forward to, I think.
Continue watching this fascinating conversation for free by clicking on the link below to visit our website, and I'll see you on the inside. 277's got a lot of battle scars, a lot of road rash, a lot of chips and
cracks and stuff like that. Patina only develops over time, and it only develops by the car being driven. You know, shiny cars are nice, but yet it's always about the people that drive the cars that create the stories and the memories.